to Esther, chapter 6. It's been an enjoyable study for me. I hope it's been that way for you as well. I've learned and seen things in this book that I never really paid attention to before. Esther chapter 6 begins. That night, the king could not sleep. Now that night refers back to what has just happened in chapter 5. Remember, Esther's preparing for the banquet, and Haman has ordered to have a gallows built to execute Mordecai on the next day. That night the king could not sleep, so one was commanded to bring the book of the records of the Chronicles, and they were read before the king. And it was found written that Mordecai had told of Bigthana and Teresh, two of the king's eunuchs, the doorkeepers who had sought to lay hands on King Ahasuerus. Then the king said, "What honor or dignity has been bestowed on Mordecai for this?" And the king's servants who attended him said, "Nothing has been done for him." So the king said, "Who is in the court?" Now Haman had just entered the outer court of the king's palace to suggest that the king hang Mordecai on the gallows that he had prepared for him. The king's servant said to him, "Haman is there, standing in the court." And the king said, "Let him come in." So Haman came in, and the king asked him, "What shall be done for the man whom the king delights to honor?" Now Haman thought in his heart, "Whom would the king delight to honor more than me?" And Haman answered the king, "For the man whom the king delights to honor, let a royal robe be brought, which the king has worn, and a horse on which the king has ridden, which has a royal crest placed on its head. Then let this robe and horse be delivered to the hand of one of the king's most noble princes, that he may array the man whom the king delights to honor. Then parade him on horseback through the city square and proclaim before him, 'Thus shall it be done to the man whom the king delights to honor.'" Then the king said to Haman, "Hurry, take the robe and the horse, as you have suggested, and do so for Mordecai the Jew, who sits within the king's gate. Leave nothing undone of all that you have spoken." So Haman took the robe and the horse, arrayed Mordecai, and led him on horseback through the city square, and proclaimed before him, "Thus shall it be done to the man whom the king delights to honor." Afterward, Mordecai went back to the king's gate, but Haman hurried to his house, mourning with his head covered. When Haman told his wife Zeresh and all his friends everything that had happened to him, his wise men and his wife Zeresh said to him, "If Mordecai, before whom you have begun to fall, is of Jewish descent, you will not prevail against him, but will surely fall before him." While they were still talking with him, the king's eunuchs came and hastened to bring Haman to the banquet which Esther had prepared. Pray with me, please. Father, as we look at this passage, there's irony, there's humor. We see your hand of providence, but there's lessons for us as well. And I pray that throughout all of this account, we will get a better understanding of why you do things the way you do, especially in those times in our life when it seems like things are out of control and we're not sure what your plan for us is. So be with us this morning, Father, as we go through this passage. Be with this message as it goes out over the internet, that it might change lives. In Jesus' name, amen. You're going to want your notes handy for this as well. We in our prayers within Jesus' name, not because that's a magical tag phrase or anything, but because we're supposed to pray to the Father in Jesus' name. And Jesus' teaching falls right into this passage, even though he wouldn't be born on earth for another 500 years or so. Right before summing up the very first sermon that Jesus ever preached, the Sermon on the Mount, in Matthew chapter 7, verse 12, Jesus said, "Therefore, whatever you want men to do for you, do also for them, for this is the law and the prophets." That's his way of summing up the Old Testament. And we often refer to that as the golden rule, right? Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Before I got saved, we had our own version of that in the group that I rode with. It was do unto others, then split. Or do unto others before they do it unto you. That's neither of those are Christian perspectives, right? Jesus' principle there, what you want men to do to you, do to them, right? Treat people the way you want to be treated. It is considered a principle, a basic principle for successful relationships in life. And we'll talk a lot about that when we get into Matthew chapter 7 in our next series, which is Kingdom Living Here and Now, which is where we'll go after Esther. But I just want to point out to you that in chapter 6 of Esther, we have a very humorous example of the golden rule played out backwards, right? It's flipped on its head. That's exactly, what Haman wants to do to Mordecai isn't what's going to happen, okay? We start with an interesting point in our text, chapter 6, verse 1. The king couldn't sleep, right? The fact that the king couldn't sleep, the original actually says the king's sleep fled away. Some of you sleep well every night. I envy you. I used to do that at one point in my life. But how many of you have nights that you can't sleep? You just, you lay down, head hits the pillow, and the brain kicks into gear at 100 miles an hour, right? Everything you did that day, everything you got planned for that, it's all this like, you want to tell your brain, just shut up and go to sleep, This is interesting because it happens to us, and undoubtedly it happened to the king, but it says that night. He's talking the time here. That night the king's sleep fled away. And while that might seem a familiar or a small thing to us, remember this. God often uses small things. We look for God's hand in these big miraculous events. God usually does the little things, and if you're not paying attention, you miss them. That night the king couldn't sleep, and that proved to be the most eventful night in the history of the Persian Empire, especially for the Jews, because this is the turning point of the book of Esther. A seemingly unimportant thing, the palace. King can't sleep. Now I'll get the recorder to come read to him, right? And that's what he would do. He would get the uninteresting records to read to him because they were conducive to sleep. But that night wasn't the case. How do I know that? Because he's still awake the next morning when Haman shows up. This dude's been up all night, right? He can't sleep. He's listening to these records, and this is the time in which the hand of God's providence is going to step in and just grab total control of what's happening in the Persian Empire. A servant is summoned to read the records. Now, if you know what this is, the records, the chronicles, think minutes of a business meeting. Aren't those exciting? That's your favorite part of a business meeting, isn't it? I've sat on boards of things. I've been in churches. I'll tell you, reading the minutes is one of the most just boring things. That's the plan. Read me the boring stuff so I can go to sleep. That's what he wants to do. What's going to happen? He's not going to nod off to a peaceful sleep. And on this particular night, the servants just happened to turn to a certain place in the minutes, and wait a minute, just happened. Can't do that, can we? I think it's in your notes. If not, write it down. There are no coincidences in God's plan. I hate it when someone says, this happened. It was a neat coincidence. There are no coincidences in God's plan. There are circumstances and there are consequences. But there's no coincidences. It was no coincidence that Esther had become queen. It was no coincidence that when she presented herself to the king in the courtroom, she found favor in his sight. It was no coincidence that he had accepted her invitation to the banquet. It was no coincidence that night the king could not sleep. And it was no coincidence that the servant began to read at a certain place. The incident he read about, and we read there, is about the time that the two eunuchs were going to, quote, lay hands on the king. They wanted to kill him, is what they were going to do. That's a nice way of saying it, right? And you can just see, here it is. We're getting toward morning. The king's been awake all night. He's probably in that kind of half groggy, half out of it state. You've been there. You know what I'm talking about, right? You look at the alarm clock and you know the alarm's going to go off in 10 minutes, and you still haven't slept, right? And the servant is droning on, and he hits this thing about poor Bigthana and who was the other guy? Teresh, two of the king's eunuchs, were going to kill him. And I love verse 3 because it's kind of like, verse 3, he goes, what? Hey, wait a minute, whoa. Did I miss this? Did you read what honor, what dignity was bestowed on Mordecai? Surely I did something, right? And again, this is one of those things where when you get to the English, you just don't get it. Verse 3, the king says, what honor or dignity has been bestowed on Mordecai for this? And the king's servant who attended him and said, there's a spot there in the original where it just pauses. Kind of like what Esther did at the invitation, right? There's this spot where he's like, flip, or scroll. Your Highness, nothing has been done for him. And that gets the king's gears going, right? He's like, oh man, the guy who saved my life should have been rewarded. Well, I really dropped the ball on this one. I'm the king. I can't do this, He needs to be rewarded. While all this is going on, somebody enters the outer courtroom on his way to see the king. Enter Haman. As all this discovery is happening about Mordecai, saving the king's life. Haman enters the outer court, and the king asks the question, who is in the court? He's heard something. Now, the king is not in the court. He's in his royal bedchamber. They say it's Haman. Haman apparently didn't sleep too well either. He's got up bright and early. He's come to the king's house to get permission to hang Mordecai on the gallows. As prime minister, Haman had the privilege of coming into the king's presence in the courtroom. But being invited into the royal bedchamber, that's a whole different animal. That's a whole new step. This is a rare honor indeed. And you just see, one of the servants pops his head out and says, Haman, the king wants you in here. And Haman's like, it's me. The king is inviting me. He's not even out of bed yet. And the king wants to see me. Oh, this is going to be a great day. Yeah. See, we've already read the story, right? All my plans are coming to fruition. So Haman comes in, and the king brings him right into the conversation without giving him any background. Don't you just hate it when that happens? I've had this happen more than once. If you've been in any kind of business, you've been in any kind of meeting, you walk in and these people are having a discussion, and you walk into the room and they go, well, what's your opinion? You're like, about what? But instead of asking the question and stopping and thinking, right, Haman just jumps right in with an answer. So learn a lesson from the Bible here, guys. Always take a moment to find out what is actually going on before you contribute your opinion. I mean, that's one of the things I enjoy when I watch TV shows or movies, is when somebody walks into a scene and gives them their opinion, and you're cracking up because they don't know what happened before. He has no idea what happened right before he walked in. If he had, he might have responded differently. So, in the Proverbs, it's only a fool answers the matter before he hears the whole thing. When someone asks you your opinion, take a moment and say, well, what exactly are we talking about here? Make sure you understand. Haman had come to ask for the life of Mordecai at the very same moment that the king wanted to reward Mordecai. These circumstances reveal the providence of God. We know that the Jews were out of the will of God. They were in a land they did not belong in. They should have gone back to Israel, but they were still under God's hand of guidance. God's people live under his guidance and providence. They don't live under coincidence, okay? It's not random chance, and it's not karma. That's not a biblical concept, guys. So Haman walks into the king's presence. He's immediately hit with a question the king asks, right? What shall be done for the man whom the king delights to honor? And being the self-centered individual that we've come to learn he is, he's sure that the king is talking about him. After all, he had been made prime minister. He had been given the king's royal ring. There's no one in the kingdom that he can think of that the king would delight to honor more than himself. But the king's thinking about Mordecai. And Haman's heart is revealed in his answer. I've read through this before in the past, and I've seen this, and I've often wondered why he blew it up so much. And in studying deeper into this, I realized the issue here. Haman had his eye on the throne. Some of the older commentators point this out. See, Haman had got as far as he could get the way he had been going. He had bought his position, right? He was now one of the most noble. He was the prime minister. What he couldn't buy was the throne. But he was just one step away from it. And he had his eye on it. When the time was right, he would do whatever it took to eliminate the king to take his place. That's the story of Eastern monarchs. It was very difficult for any king to stay on the throne very long. In fact, Israel's history, if you read through 1st and 2nd Kings, which I know is kind of a boring, dry read, don't read 1st and 2nd Kings in bed at night. You won't get very far, okay? But if you read through it and ignore the tragedy, it's almost humorous to see how short time periods most of the kings ruled. A couple of them barely made it 2 months. I mean, so-and-so was king, got killed. So-and-so was king. And in Babylon and in Persia and in Assyria, that's the way it was. One Babylonian king went into the temple with his 2 sons to worship, and while he was doing that, they killed him. And then they killed each other because they both wanted to be king. And then I think the wife ended up queen, but then somebody killed her because they didn't want to. So this is what Haman wants. He wants the throne. When a king sat on a throne in those days, he never really knew who his friends or enemies were. He could never really let his guard down, which is why they had the rule about the golden scepter. You couldn't approach the king, couldn't get close enough to kill him. Okay. So what Haman does here in his answer is he reveals where his heart is at. Look at verses 6 through 9 again. And with that understanding that he wants to be king, now look at verses 6 through 9. Haman thought in his heart, whom would the king delight to honor more than me? And Haman answered the king, for the man whom the king delights to honor, let a royal robe be brought, which the king has worn, and a horse on which the king has ridden, which has a royal crest placed on his head. Crest can be translated crown. In other words, you know this is the king's horse. You don't touch it for fear of death, okay? Then let this robe and horse be delivered to the hand of one of the king's most noble princes, that he may array the man whom the king delights to honor. So this dude isn't going to put it on himself. Have one of the king's most noble princes dress this guy, right? And prepare him, and prepare the horse, and put him on the horse, and then parade him on horseback to the city square, proclaiming, thus shall be done to the man whom the king delights to honor. What Haman is thinking, and what you're seeing in those verses, is this. Let's get inside his head for a moment. Put me in the apparel of the king, and let me ride on the king's horse with the crown on its head, and let it be announced as I go through the street that I am the one that the king delights to honor. Then, when I take out the king and become king, the people will be ready for that. They've already seen me on the royal horse and the royal robe with the king's blessing, so it'll just be the next natural step, and the kingdom will be mine. And you know, Ahasuerus, for all of his weirdnesses, he's still king, and he's still not a dumb man. And I think what happens right here, as he hears Haman do all this, is that fog of the sleepless night starts to clear a little bit. Man, dude, this is a little extreme, isn't it? Oh, you dirty dog. This is all about you. You're thinking this is all about you? I think he almost chuckles when he says what he says next. Because as Haman has rattled this whole thing off, man, and he's so excited, verse 10, look at verse 10. Then the king says to Haman, hurry, take the robe and the horse, as you have suggested, and do so for Mordecai the Jew, who sits within the king's gate, and leave nothing undone of all that you have spoken. I mean, at this point, if you want to chuckle, then yeah, you got it. You're getting the message here, right? See, I think the king has figured this out. He said, okay, this is what you're thinking here? Well, let's see how you feel when we do it this way. This moves from irony to humor, because Haman has just painted himself into a corner from which he has no way of escape. The king just commanded him to do exactly what he had just said, right? But in reading that, did you miss it? Did you miss something in verse 10 that's right there? And you've seen it before, but you weren't paying attention? Everybody's looking at verse 10 going, I don't know. Then the king said to Haman, hurry, take the robe and the horse, as you suggested, and do so for, what's it say?
Mordecai the Jew.
Mordecai the Jew. King Ahasuerus knows that Mordecai is a Jew. That fact is not mentioned up to this point in this book. Some of the people know. Some of the people in the gate and some of the people in the city of Shushan know. In the reading of the Chronicles, it's not Mordecai the Jew, it's simply Mordecai. The king is not an idiot. The king has started to figure some of this out, and maybe the king's starting to realize, oh man, this decree that I let Haman do, and he's got himself one of these spots. So when he says it, he doesn't say for Mordecai who sits there, he says for Mordecai the Jew. And this is important. It will be important as the story continues. Understand, the king isn't the dopey king that some of these Sunday school stories have tried to portray him as. He has an idea of what's going on. He just doesn't know how to get out of it. But God's going to take care of that for him. There's nothing more humiliating that the king could have asked Haman to do than to put royal garments on Mordecai and put him on the king's horse and then lead him through the city proclaiming, this is what the man that the king delights to honor gets, right? This would have been an embarrassment beyond words. He hated Mordecai the Jew. And to have to do this, would have been staggering. Instead of leading Mordecai through the streets in honor, his plan had been to go and get permission to execute Mordecai. It's hard to even imagine what his feelings were like as he's doing this. His plan was go in early, get permission, have Mordecai executed, bask in the glory of his dying body on that, pole 75 feet high, right? And enjoy that for a while he prepared to go have the banquet with the king and Esther. That was his plan for the day. Instead, he had to go dress this dirty, rotten Jew that won't even bow down to me, and I've got to put a royal robe on him. Well, that means like the royal, sandals and the whole. I've got to groom him and do the horse and put him on the horse and parade him through town. Thus shall it be for the man whom the king delights to honor. I mean, this has got to be killing him. This is just literally got to be killing him. This is a guy who wouldn't show respect to him and he's having to parade him around in honor. Wow. So at the end, Mordecai returns to the king's gate. That's, our text says afterward, verse 12, Mordecai went back to the king's gate, basking in the glory of what had just happened. No question about it. Yes, the decree of death is still hanging over their heads, but that's a year out, right? And God's doing something here. But basking in this glory for a moment, can you imagine, though, the people of Shushan have been awakened to a parade honoring Mordecai, the man whom the king delights to honor. And with a parade like that, as he would go by, other people are going to join in the parade, dancing and singing and enjoying this. And the people of the city of Shushan, remember, this is the same city that was all confused about the decree just a little bit earlier. And imagine their confusion now, because they know Mordecai is a Jew. He's under the decree of death, and yet he's being paraded through the city by Haman, the king's prime minister, proclaiming the king's delight. And this is where the lesson is for us, okay? Because you and I need to understand this. This is something we read as kind of humorous and everything, but here's the lesson for you and me. If you get nothing else, get this. If you ever feel confused about God's plan for your life, you've got this all mapped out, what you want to do, and all of a sudden it's taking a right-hand turn and you're over here going, what? What are you, am I out of your will? Am I in your will? If you've ever felt confused, think back to this account and trust in God's providential love. God knows what he's doing. You might be going, I don't get this. I don't understand a word of this. Well, why is this happening to me right? If you're saved. Now, if you're not saved and your life's falling apart, that's your fault, okay? You need to get right with God. You need to come to Christ. You need to accept the fact that he died on the cross for your sins. He was buried, and he rose again the third day. Simple gospel message. A little kid can get this. If you're bucking God's plan for your life as an unbeliever and your life is falling apart, awesome. I hope it stinks and continues to stink and hurt and be miserable until you bend the knee and say, I'm sorry, God, I've been trying to run my life. I need to let you run it. Mordecai didn't plan this. Mordecai is as blown away as Haman was. Haman is humiliated. Mordecai is like, this is awesome. I don't understand why this is happening. And the people of the city of Shushan are like, what? Mordecai's a Jew. The king sent out a decree to kill all the Jews. I don't get this. That's exactly how God works sometimes. You want it all spelled out for you, and God says, that's not how I do things. He's sovereign, and we're not. And that's a hard truth sometimes. But this is a lesson in the sovereignty and providential love of God. God is doing something here that he didn't have to do. God could have executed the whole rest of this plan without doing this. God is doing something to show that he's in charge. Not the gods of the Persians, not the gods of Haman, not even the gods of Ahasuerus, but Yahweh God, the God. Okay? For Mordecai, this is just getting better and better, because not only is he being honored by the king finally for what he did, some years back, but it's Haman who gets to lead the parade. In years to come, I'm sure that Mordecai would chuckle as he recalled the events of that morning. I don't know that he knew about the gallows. He knew later about the gallows. But, oh wow. Haman, however, dun, 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 right? He hurries home, mourning, it says. I love that. Mourning and having his head covered. Shame beyond shame has just been heaped on his head. And reality check, it's all his own fault. He was the one who had proposed this whole idea to the king. Always be careful of what you propose to the king. You come in with an idea and to your boss, and your boss blesses somebody else with it. Well, is this your fault? Maybe it was God's plan. Always be careful. Here he was planning an early morning audience with the king, going to get permission to hang Mordecai, and instead he ends up parading Mordecai around the city, honoring him, and apparently it went in part of the day, because by the time he's done, they come and grab him and take him to the feast. So his whole morning has been ruined, right? Everything he had planned out has gone sideways. He doesn't understand this at all. He comes home to his wife and I love this, his wise friends. I just cracked up when I read that. They were really wise, weren't they? Giving him counsel that's really going to cost him. He comes to them for consolation, and the same group, look at this, verse 13, about halfway through, says, if Mordecai, before whom you have begun to fall, the verb there, the idea is, you're on the edge here, okay, and you're already leaning forward. You're beyond the point of no return. This is where you are, Haman. If Mordecai, before whom you have begun to fall, is of Jewish descent. You will not prevail against him, but will surely fall before him. I had to wonder as I read it. So, in all the previous conversations, that he left out the fact that Mordecai was a Jew? Or maybe his wife and his friends weren't listening very closely? Whatever the case, it's not very comforting when you come home, right, for solace and comfort, and they say, you really messed up, man. You go to prison for the rest of your life. Yeah, you're going to die. I mean, sorry, you have really messed up. It's all over with. You made a potentially fatal error in judgment. Thanks, guys. That's what I needed to hear. But God's not done yet. Because God is showing not just his providential love for Mordecai, but his complete control in the situation. Things start happening really quickly now. Haman no sooner than gets home, he starts telling his wife and his friends about it when, on the door, right, opens the door, and here's the king's eunuchs, and they hasten to, in other words, let's go now. No change of clothes, no time for a quick shower and a shave. No, just go, right now. Away we go. He doesn't even have time to think about what to do next. The banquet that Queen Esther had prepared was ready. Remember I told you earlier that the king put Haman under the authority of Esther? Here it is the second time. Esther has already prepared the banquet. You are under her authority. Let's go. But no buts about it. Let's go. And out the door he goes. As he's going, you see him hurrying along and go like, he's looking forward to this dinner. He had bragged about it. I am the only one besides the king whom Queen Esther has invited to the banquet. Now, he's potentially arriving late because this whole day has been messed up, right? Everything's happening so fast he can't keep track of what's going on. Things are happening in his life that he has no control over. And there's a reason why. God is in control. And God is seeing to it that Haman's plot won't succeed. If you're running along in life without God, either as an unbeliever or as a believer who has left God out of your plans, you've got all your plans laid out ahead of you, everything you're going to do, but you're not seeking God's will or guidance in all those plans, and all of a sudden the rug gets ripped out from underneath you and you're wondering what's going on, you need to repent. You say, I'm sorry, God. I took charge of my own life again, didn't I? I took control. I've seen that bumper sticker on the cars. God is my co-pilot. If he is, you really messed that up. Hand into teeth. God should be driving, right? You should be along for the ride. God's will is what needs to happen in your life, not your will or my will. Haman, he has no idea at all at this point. He's just confused. Things aren't working out. What am I supposed to do? He enters the banquet filled with fear, and I'm sure that the last words that his wife spoke to him are still ringing in his ears. Before whom you have begun to fall. He had wrongly anticipated the events of the day, and now, I don't think you can go to the banquet and ask for permission to execute Mordecai, do you? It's not going to work really well, is it? I mean, the one guy he wants dead, and the king just made him parade him around the whole city and honor him. Oh man, how am I going to fix this mess? I want to go to the banquet, but I'm mad. My whole day's been ruined by Mordecai the Jew. And remember this, Haman doesn't have a clue why. It's kind of like when you read the book of Job, right? All this stuff happens to Job, and Job doesn't have a clue why. In fact, at the end of the book, Job still doesn't know why. You and I seem to think we deserve answers from God. We deserve, this is why I'm doing what I'm doing. That's not how God works. Haman doesn't have a clue. He doesn't know why. He wasn't privy to the conversation earlier, the reading of the Chronicles. He doesn't know what was going on. He doesn't know why, Mordecai was honored, but he wasn't. He has no idea what has begun the downward spiral. But what really began it is his hatred of the Jews. His pride and his arrogance, and this stuff back in the earlier chapters. Little did he realize that before the day would end, his entire life would be upside down. He would be forced to honor Mordecai in the morning. Esther's feast would turn into the expose of a traitor, and he, not Mordecai, would end up dead on the gallows. Horrible day, huh? And you think you've had bad days. Some references in your notes for you. And I put that little note in there, reference, New King James. Proverbs 11:8 reminds us, the righteous is delivered from trouble, and it comes to the wicked instead. Proverbs 29:23, the same message. A man's pride shall bring him low, but the humble in spirit will retain honor. Those truths are true. Sometimes we don't see it immediately. Sometimes it takes time. Remember, this has been going on for like 10 to 12 years now. But God's timing is never wrong. James, Jesus' little brother, wrote, God resists the proud, but gives grace to the humble. Therefore submit to God, resist the devil, and he will flee from you. Draw near to God, and he will draw near to you. Cleanse your hands, you sinners, and purify your hearts, you double-minded. Lament and mourn and weep. Let your laughter be turned to mourning and your joy to gloom. Humble yourselves in the sight of the Lord, and he will lift you up. James 4, verses 6 through 10. I would encourage you, if you're not in any other style of devotions and stuff this week, go through those verses. James 4, 6 through 10, it should be in your notes. Meditate on those verses. Haman mourned because he had been embarrassed. Haman mourned and wept because his life was falling apart. But even for believers, there are times when we need to look at our lives and lament and mourn. You know, I grew up in a different America than I live in right now. And there are times that I look at what's going on in the world and I weep. I just, you know, our country, our world, when it's perfectly fine to murder babies, but it's a felony to kill a dog. You know, when the front runner for the next presidential race from one of the parties is an open homosexual living with his husband. I look at our country and I go, how? How did we fall so far? And we did because, like the Jews in Persia, we left God out of the equation. Our churches fall apart, our families fall apart, our personal faith lacks because we don't lament and mourn and weep. There are times for laughter and joy, absolutely. But there are times that we need to evaluate our own lives and pray and repent. There are times where as a church we need to do that, and as a country. There's some biblical truths for you and me in this account as well. I put those in your notes. First one, proud people look for ways to hurt other people, tearing them down. That's what Haman was doing. He hated Mordecai. So much so that he was going to kill 15 million people. Humble people look for ways to help other people, building them up. The New Testament is full of this teaching, building others up. Let nothing come out of your mouth but things that lift people up and build people, edify, strengthen them. God resists, which means he works against proud people, but God gives grace to the humble. I think there's two questions at the bottom of your notes. What kind of a person am I? And what kind of a person do I want to be? Are you the kind of person who builds people up? When someone comes to you and they share their problems and stuff, unlike his wife and his wife's friends, everything they gave him was bad counsel, right? Are you the kind of person that somebody comes to you and you give them bad counsel? Or you give them godly counsel? Do they leave your presence feeling built up? Even if it involves hard teaching. True love doesn't ignore true statements, okay? When someone comes and says, my life's falling apart, Pastor, I've got this and that, and stuff that's going on in my life, the first thing I go to is, okay, where are you spiritually? Where are you in your walk with God? And every single time, well, it's not like it used to be. Of course it's not. That's why you're where you're at, right? It's the consequence of your choices. What kind of person do you want to be? I don't want to be like Haman or Mordecai, to be honest. They both had issues. And I'm not real happy with either one of them. But I want to be like what James describes, what Jesus describes. Do to other people what you would want them to do to you. Right? Treat other people the way you want to be treated. Be nice. Be kind. Be generous. Be loving. Be honest. Be faithful. Be trustworthy. Be merciful. Nothing wrong with any of those, is there? And tell them the truth about Jesus. Don't leave them in the darkness. If God brings them into your life, and you have the light, and you don't shine the light into their life, that's on you. Don't leave them standing in the darkness when they come to you for help. Pray with me, please. Father, this account is humorous at spots, ironic at spots, and amazing to see that even in a man who really wasn't walking with you like he should have, you still showed your providential love in his life. And you've done that for us. There isn't a person here, there isn't a person who watches online who can say, I deserve to enjoy God's providential love in my life. I deserve God's grace and God's mercy. We deserve nothing outside of hell. Everything else is grace. Help us, Father, to remember that truth, to live in light of that truth, and be thankful for that. Every good and every perfect thing comes from you. Every blessing we have in our lives comes from you. Every great friendship we have, every love we have, every joy we have is a gift from you. And Father, we'll start seeing our life that way and realizing how bad pride is and getting it out of our lives. We can be used mightily of you. We can be the kind of men and women that other people come to for counsel and help and say, hey, my life's a wreck. I need help. And we can point them to Jesus. And the power of the Holy Spirit in a born-again believer is amazing. Help us, Father, to be bringers of light into the darkness. Help us to see and catch those moments where your providential love has guided us into places of blessing that we didn't deserve at all, and to rejoice in those and to thank you for those. Thank you for this time. Lord, help us to truly take that which comes from you and from your word and the power of the Spirit and apply it in our lives, that we might be different people than we were when we came in here today. And we'll thank you and praise you in Jesus' name. And all God's people said. Amen.